I'm really tempted to merciful heart. Can everyone hear us okay? Back, everyone can hear us? Shut up, Marcus. You and your jokes. Everyone at the back hear us? Cool. Guys, alright, thank you so much for coming. My name is Henry Palmer, and for context, I had a book published a few years ago on the gentrification of Bristol. I grew up in Easton, and when I was growing up in Easton, it was quite a much poorer community, lower socioeconomic community. The European Commission held it as one of the most deprived wards in the whole of the southwest of England in 1998. And I went off to uni in 2013 to 2016, and something I found really strange when I came back is I was working as an Uber driver because I studied philosophy and film studies, so that's what you do with that. But something I found really odd was I was driving around as a driver, and I could tell if somebody was new to Bristol or not, depending on how they reacted when I'd say I was from Easton. So I'd say, where are you from? And they'd say Surrey or whatever, and I say, which is fine, nothing wrong with Surrey, just to be clear, it's the policies and the selfish developers who are the main antagonists from a gentrification lens. But anyway, they'd be like, where are you from? Easton. So typically, people obviously would be like, oh, show us your wounds. But I had passengers who would actually respond and say, oh, nice. Which I found was really odd and really strange, and so it was massively politicised at uni, like lots of us are anyway. So I looked more into gentrification and this idea of simple definition, lower socioeconomic communities becoming effectively posher and more affluent because of amenities, because of it being closer to inner cities or inner towns. For context, when we were growing up in the late 90s in Easton, the average house price around there was about £35,000 to £40,000. When my book was published in 2019, Average house price in the BS5 postcode was about £250,000. Just 3 years on now, the average house price in BS5 is about £310,000. 3 years ago, when the book was published, the housing register list in Bristol was about 12,000 plus, and now it's 18,000 plus. So that's just a little bit about me and a bit of context there. What we'll do now is we'll hear from the panelists. We'll hear introductions from each one, and in what capacity you're here, and why gentrification matters to you. Why is it important? Why is it relevant? And we'll start with Councillor Tom Renard on the end.
Hi everyone. So Councillor Tom Renard, I was elected to the council last May, so I don't think I get away with saying relatively new these days, but I've been on there about 18 months. And I currently hold the housing brief on the council, so housing delivery and homes. But one of the main reasons it's important to me is it's literally my delegation of responsibilities from the mayor. I have one in there that says gentrification, and really getting me to think about what are we doing, or what can we do to address it as a local council. So it's an issue that's important from that perspective, because it's part of my responsibilities, but also it's important when we're building homes, we're not pricing out communities, and we really need to think about what we can do to address that. So that's why it's important to me.
Matt Buckham.
Hi folks, I'm Matt Buckham, Community Investment Director at Sovereign Housing. And so Sovereign Housing are a housing association with about 60,000 homes across the south of England, predominantly in areas where we want to develop more housing. Obviously gentrification is a huge issue. We want to provide as much affordable and social housing as we can. Why it's important to me, first off, Henry asked me, and I work alongside Henry, and for me, I think my family originated kind of in the northeast and gradually moved further south, mainly due to economic policy that was driven by government. And it's really a passion of mine really to create local thriving areas. So I've spent nearly 20 years in social housing, working with charities like the organisation here to help take on local assets and actually develop them out and create social enterprises and local economic development from the ground up. So really passionate about hearing from you as well as us as panellists. So yeah, thank you for having me here tonight.
Elsie. No, you're going last because you're reading the poem. No, because what happened is...
my last initial had just changed from it.
No, because if you go now,
yeah, that's okay.
then we'll hear the poem, but then we've got to have Elsie.
We've planned all of this.
Yeah, my name's Elsie. I am chair of the Bristol branch of Acorn, and Acorn is a community union that kind of organises low-income people and sort of fight and win on issues that matter to them. That could be anything from public transport to kind of resisting evictions, to improving the quality of housing in private rented accommodation, a whole series of issues. And yeah, I think gentrification and this talk today is really important to me. For one, because I've grown up in Bristol as well, like Henry, kind of predominantly around like eastern surrounding areas. I've seen like the real rapid changes in those areas over the last like 10 years in particular. But also because I think like gentrification to me is sort of a symptom of much wider inequality that we see across society today. And it's that kind of inequality which is central to what Acorn organises around and what we fight for. Yeah.
Thanks, guys. And Lawrence?
My name's Lawrence Hu. I'm a Bristol poet. I'm a resident of Bristol for about 48 years. Grown up in the inner city of Bristol, watched my community get decimated after being neglected for like decades. Then all of a sudden it became a jewel in the city, and everybody got displaced. There were loads of actions that weren't able to be done. When the city didn't care for my community, all of a sudden were implemented everywhere. And all of a sudden, one of the most dangerous and unloved and unkept communities has become one of the most affluent and protected, and you can hear a pin drop at night. So I've seen a lot of promises being made that were never kept. I've seen a lot of social housing being removed, and promises were made that it would be replaced. And it hasn't been replaced, so I think and my poetry has been inspired through the life I've lived in this city. So I owe Bristol my career in a sense, because the neglect through their system is what's inspired me to create the work that I do. So yeah, so I use my voice, shine a light on the stuff that often the city never wanted to notice.
And Lawrence, before, what we were going to do for format, guys, is we have some questions I was going to ask the panel, and then whoever wanted to respond to that could go ahead. And then we were going to open up to questions to you. And like Matt said, really want to hear from you, your experience of gentrification, what comes to mind, how do you feel about it? And then music and shake the kneecaps. Just for anyone who's up for that. But before the questions, Lawrence was going to read a poem.
Well, I got a poem. It's called In the City Tales. So it's inspired by In the City, and I kind of dedicate it to all the people I grew up with. The majority, a lot of them are no longer here due to the environment they were forced to grow up with. So the poem goes: so many misguided and divided, down into minor figures, while outsiders snigger as they watch on TV thinking, to hell with these fools with nothing to lose. They should have stayed in school instead of breaking rules. But wait, we're not fools. We are the tools that are used to distract and confuse people's opinions on the news through pure distorted views, which are pushed through the media to create hysteria. Oh my God, these people are so evil, don't let them near you, is the chat we hear. But let's be clear, how did we get here? With children raised in fear, locked in communities nobody wanted to go near, but now people want to live here. So let the truth be known of how we have grown, deprived of care or concern from the scared or concerned. Due to society's neglect, people have to fret, as we have learned to be cold-hearted to all but our own. But that is just a reflection of the love that we have been shown. You see, in this time of turmoil and change, people have lost belief in the systems that many have relied on since coming of age. But through this uncertainty, souls have risen, looking to create new opportunities and driven by the need to succeed, not driven by greed, by the endless possibilities of planting a seed. In a world of contradictions with boundless destinations, for the future is not written. Fate is created by the will of the owner of the soul, who strives and reaches for the goal of becoming whole with oneself. This is life's most precious gift, and its true wealth. What we have to do is we have to care for all the people who are staying here, so that they can learn to live and to bear. So I've got to find this a bit nice.
Remix.
Here we go. This is life's most precious gift, and it's a wealth that we all should share. We just need to understand, to be aware of all the people who need us to care, so that we can all live a life instead of a full life instead of one unable to bear. So let's unravel ourselves from the controlling spell of stories and tales from heaven to hell, forever being told this would be our fate, destined to a hell filled with hate. If we don't conform to the norm and behave well, hell no. Who knows what the future holds? So be bold. Don't do as you're told. Take hold and move towards the new while banking the old. For your life is a story that is yet to be told.
Yay!
Thanks, Lawrence. And something that came to mind for me there when you were speaking is when I was researching for the book, I spoke to lots of academics and people and so on, and some academics was Professor Loretta Lees and Professor Tom Slater, and one of the things that they point to is actually, prior to any communities becoming gentrified, what's key to enable that to happen is actually the stigmatization of an area. That is the demonization of an area to make it effectively. If you've ever spoken to anybody about gentrification, you might have heard this notion of, it is bad, but I suppose cities have to change somehow. If you've ever heard this, or, well, there's nothing you can do, or at least it's being enhanced in this way. And that's often a cop-out that is espoused through the sort of defeatist sort of outlook when it comes to gentrification. But we'll get to the questions, and the first question, which I'm going to put to the panel, and whoever might have something to say on this, just chip in. So when the sociologist Ruth Glass first wrote about gentrification in the 60s, she made the point that it was overall a negative thing, and sociologists have mostly written about it in a similar vein since. Is it a bad thing, and why?
I'll start off. I'd say overwhelmingly yes, it is a bad thing, and that's primarily because the kind of improvements or development that occurs in areas that are gentrified are only improvements or development for a specific set of people. It doesn't work to improve the area for all people of the area, particularly the long-term residents, which historically have been at the face of underfunding in those areas and kind of neglect of their resources and infrastructure. And I think like a real key example of that in the kind of the way that gentrification sort of puts like a glass front on areas but doesn't actually tackle inequality of those areas. With a case we had at Acorn with one of our members, Fadumo, she lives right in the heart of St Werburgh's, which from the outset is quite like an affluent area, lots of nice shops and cafes and stuff. She was living in a rental property which for a month last December, her boiler was completely broken and the landlord was refusing to fix it. She went for a month with her kids and elderly mother without any hot water or heating, until we organised and kind of stood up for Dumo and went down to the agency to demand change. That issue was persistent and left her in like a real exploitative situation of housing. And it goes to show, even in an area like St Werburgh's, that's had loads of money chucked at it and kind of a real change in community over the last decades, that wealth and affluence of the area does not go to solve the integral issues of exploitation that persist by large through exploitative landlords and kind of big business that doesn't actually improve the lives of all people in those areas.
Yeah, and I think another thing to consider in that is people from lower socioeconomic backgrounds, working class backgrounds, feel inherently downtrodden. They feel like nobody listens. So what's the point in ringing up the local authorities and reporting X, Y, and Z? And it's why I think it's part of the reason why, isn't it, in more affluent areas you don't have as many creators or as many issues with infrastructure and so on, because people actually ring up and they actually report them because they understand the way that they understand that if you don't report it, nothing's going to be done. They don't feel perhaps as jaded as a result because there's not that historical sort of suppression or oppression, generational in that area. Clifton is a completely different ball game. Westbury-on-Trym at this side of any deprivation report decades going back, with Barton Hill or Easton or Ashley Ward at the other end.
I want to pick up on those points. People do care, and they're not completely jaded. They do phone up, they do complain. It's just that at the other end they're not listened to.
Yeah,
it depends on the wealth or how the people who are complaining, how they're seen. So when someone phones up on their BSA, they could be in some very prominent position in a job or employment where they could get their issue heard. When it's in what you want to call a low socio-economic community, they don't listen. So I can give you an example of how we met in the Sea Tales. So that was when Millpond Primary School, which I think it's now called Green Acres or something like that, used to be the mill. That's a primary school there where when they first gentrified St Paul's, which was going back 15, 20 years when they started to put that into place, Portland Square 20 years ago, every single corner had prostitutes working on it. Right? St Paul's was the sex vice capital for the southwest of England. So Portland Square had prostitutes in every corner of City Road had prostitutes working on it, every corner of Ashley Road, every corner of Bristol Road, that was all prostitutes, 3 to 4 at a time. So what happened is they started to clean up here, down to little things like making brighter lights appear in St Paul's, so they changed the light. It moved towards Easton. So then it moved outside Millpond Primary School, which is a local primary school in Easton, outside the health centre. Now, the communities there phone up over and over and over again continually to try to get this removed. And people, they literally answer the phone, you report a problem, and it could be drug dealing, it could be violence, or it could be sex workers. And you would hear the tone change from the person on the end of the phone. When they said, so where are you calling from? And you say, Eastern, so I said, oh, wow. So I think what it is that we don't get the response that we should get, and it's then to hold the system itself, so we have to try to hold the council to account, to make them care for people that they don't actually really see value in. And that's what the pain really is. And I think, and that's where the internet has made things change. Before the internet, if you couldn't get into certain of these places or spaces, you weren't seen. Now the internet has made it that you can get things seen, and so you can force change. But I think, yeah, a lot of the time it's actually the other end. There was a energy there not to create the change, and there's no fear of reprisals through not acting. I think that's just got to be added into there. Something that's not. You got people that have been complaining for 20, 30 years, blue in the face, and nobody would hear, because some of these communities at certain places, they were designated to be dumping drives for all of the cities.
Well, there's Coral Cafe now in St Paul's, Coral Cafe, or it's Montpellier. So I used to work around there as a caretaker, and there's a spot where fly tipping happens constantly, always and always. And I'd speak to local residents and say, because they point it out, and I say, well, did you ring up? Did you report it? I said, no, there's no point. And so that's actually a consequence of like what you were just saying then, of time and time again, just not really being listened to, and it just happening so often. Any other views on whether gentrification is a bad thing?
Yeah, I mean, I think just to add a couple of points, I suppose, in terms of, and it's a shame Vicky isn't here today, because I think she would have given a kind of national sort of picture of the change of sort of particularly the sort of housing sector. But I think one of the things that's kind of sort of fueled some of that, not only the sort of private developer and external investment from overseas into major cities and conurbations, but I dug out a couple of stats earlier just on housing benefit. And what's happened is, in terms of the private rented sector, so back in 2007 there was 2.8 million people in the private rented sector, and by 2017 that was 4.5 million people. So the growth in the private sector and buy to let and that kind of landlord sort of driven profit making sort of enterprise grew significantly. Owner occupiers kind of stayed at a similar sort of level at about 17 million. But actually what's happened over that period of time is social housing has actually decreased. So although we're building as much as we can as housing associations and councils, actually people are still purchasing social housing and through voluntary right to buy and other things, and actually we're not replacing those homes in the way that we should. So I think the gentrification thing around cities and the sort of economic wealth drives people into those cities, but what we need is real kind of thought leadership really from government to change that, and local authorities such as Bristol do put high percentages of affordable housing into their development. So a lot of the new build around here, Wapping Wharf and others you may see, we've got kind of 30% of a lot of those properties that are actually rented out or bought through shared ownership. So there's a lot of difference there, and I think the points you make around being listened to, people haven't been heard, and we work with partners in certain areas, and actually people won't go out for certain crimes because they just don't see it as a major issue. You had the recent thing around house burglaries. The police are only just starting to say that they're going to go out to visit people's homes if they're burgled. So there's been a huge shift probably in the last decade around investment in core social services and core public services that has basically drained our public infrastructure to the point where it is really struggling. And then that topped with private sector wealth. We know on some of our schemes that we're developing, we've got external potentially Arab investors that are buying 10, 15, 20 apartments off plan, and we're there really with sometimes empty schemes that we're filling with residents locally. So from our point of view at Sovereign, what we're trying to do, and I'll stop in a second because I can't go on about this all night, is we're shifting to much more of a land-led approach where we will buy land, and again this is all this divide is based on wealth of land, who owns the land, and developers. You see in an economic downturn now, developers aren't going to build out their sites, they're just going to wait. We will continue to build, and we will buy off those developers, but where we're developing a site that's land-led, we will kind of tend to go a third for sale, a third for shared ownership, and a third for social rent. And part of that is around how we can try and develop mixed communities and get away from that point. And actually, people live side by side. We're all human at the end of the day. And I think our kind of policy has driven a divide in the country that's got worse and worse over the past 15 years or so.
And and I echo what you say. It is a shame that Vicky can't be with us today. There's some things there, but just to reel off for context, how when it comes to social housing, when it comes to gentrification, housing is at absolutely the heart of it. If people can't afford to live, there's not the provision of affordable social housing. People can't live there, and all the usual consequences of gentrification result, right? So homelessness increase, displacement, either financial or cultural. Such a thing as actually not feeling like you belong in the community exists. In 1980, council housing in Bristol was 33%. Now it's about 12%. Through the right to buy that was brought in 1980. If we go off national statistics, about 40 to 45% of those houses that were built up now belong to buy-to-let landlords.
And just to add, Henry, sorry to interrupt. In terms of the actual value of that. So, and this is sort of 5-6 years old. There was £9.3 billion of housing benefit that went to private landlords. £9.3 billion. And that is the same amount that went to social housing landlords and housing associations that reinvest all of that money back into those properties to make them better. And our councils was £6 billion. So your private landlords, they're getting public money, and some of them are good and some of them invest in their homes, but as you've seen through Right to Buy, a number of those end up back in private sector hands and basically let out to tenants who end up going to Acorn to ask for support to fix boilers. So the system is broken.
And the percentage to sum up